Welcome to the Salt Lake County Republican Party broadcast, your online source for party business, news, events, and where we keep the republic one broadcast at a time. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or whenever you are getting this podcast. My name is Nathan Ricks. I'm the co-host and producer of the Salt Lake County broadcast, the podcast for your business and news for the Salt Lake County GOP. I got your host here, Dr. Thomas Young, the county party treasurer. He's also here with Matt MacPherson, House candidate for House District 26. Is that correct?
That's correct. Hello.
Howdy, folks. Say hello, Doctor.
Hey, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
You bet. I'm doing great this morning.
I got a question for you before we start.
Okay.
You're an elephant. You can't sell it. You can't give it away. What do you do with it?
I feel like that there's something more to this question that I'm maybe not picking up on.
Nope, just...
It's meant to throw you off.
Oh, okay.
If you're thrown off during the whole thing, you're more honest. Not saying that you're not.
So I am an elephant? I don't have an elephant?
Oh, you're given an elephant.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Tell it right,
You're
Doc.
given an elephant.
I'm given an elephant, and I can't
sell it.
Sell it.
Can't give it away.
Can't give it away.
What do you do with it?
Well, I've got a T-shirt that kind of summarizes maybe my answer, which may not be necessarily the best answer, but my T-shirt says, "I'd smoke that." I'm a big smoker when it comes to meats in particular, and it has a picture of a dinosaur and a cow and a pig, like all the weirdest animals. And I'll be honest, I would love to smoke it up, see what it tastes like, make a burger out of it. But that being said, humanely, of course. But no, in all seriously, I don't know. I don't know what I'd do with an elephant. If I couldn't get rid of it or sell it, you'd have to donate it, unless that counts as giving it away.
That's giving it away.
Okay, well, then I guess I would just do my best to put it in a big pen and sell rides to children in the neighborhood and make some money off of it.
Unique.
And give the kids at least a little bit of enjoyment for
That's
them.
right. That's right.
Remember,
until it's too old and
capitalism's
too
the
feeble.
mutual exchange, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm a businessman at heart, so I make some money off of it.
Smart. All right. I got a couple questions for you.
Sure.
I've heard these issues come up over and over in the county and across the state. Housing. Home ownership peaked in 2006 at 76% in Utah. For 2023, it's probably down to 70%, an early 1990s low. What can be done? Do you think the explosion in apartment buildings across the county has made homeownership more or less likely? What would you do about it? It's a top priority of voters.
Sure. And I understand that knee-jerk reaction to want a solution to a problem like this from legislature. But fundamentally, I don't believe that this is a problem of legislature, other than in those circumstances where we've already intervened. In many of those cases, I think that needs to be pulled back. But I am a capitalist. I'm a free market guy. I'm a businessman, and in general, whenever I see an intervention from the government, no matter how pure-hearted it may be in intention, invariably I don't see the benefit that they're looking to provide, and long-term, it typically leads to another problem, or possibly extending the problem. When it comes to just the basics of economics, I think that problem is going to be best solved naturally on its own. It's painful, it's difficult, and there are ways we can perhaps mitigate those for individuals and families and for communities. But as far as solving that problem, I don't think that's a problem for government to solve. There's too much of a decision, I think, from politicians to try to, for individuals, families, communities, churches. These communities are better equipped to handle the problems of society. And when you come to housing is something that the government does have their fingers in and a lot of control when it comes to things like zoning issues. And that is at play here, obviously. The explosion of these higher density projects, especially the mixed commercial residential properties. I think we all know that that commercial bubble is soon to pop, and the housing market is not terribly far behind. I think it would be premature for the legislature to try to insert themselves into that, try to disrupt that process, other than, again, where they have already overreached, other than where they have already put too many controls in place to try to direct the market in certain ways. I don't think they're good at it, and I think they should step away from it.
Oh, that was a real good answer. From my perspective, that was a real good answer. I've seen over the past, I was a staff member to the legislature for 15 years, and I've seen a shift in perspective where everything that gets spent is an investment. Everything's solving an important problem that would probably be better solved by the market, right?
Yes.
Wow.
I think we're on the same page there, at least.
All right, let's shift to a different topic because we don't have you forever.
That's fair.
The west side of Salt Lake County, sometimes you get the impression that it isn't as important as the east side.
What gave you that impression?
Actually, I don't know. I just hear it. But
yeah,
I would think the west side should have more influence at the legislature. I don't know. What are your thoughts there? Judging from what I can tell, you'll be a real good advocate for the west side. And not only the west side, I'm guessing you think statewide as well, even though you represent your constituents.
Sure. I've been in Utah for about 20 years now. I moved here. I'm born and raised from Las Vegas. Moved here about 20 years ago. When I first moved to Utah, I did live on the east side for about a year and a half. And then I moved into West Valley shortly after. The home I'm in now, I've been there 15 years. And that's, to me, it's a big deal. I've been successful in business. I've made some good business investments that have paid off. And I've had the opportunity to move. The market's been great for selling, at least over the last several years. And I have my family, my wife and I, we don't want to move. We like the community we live in. We like the city. But you're right. There is a disparity between the west side, east side. I think most people realize that money is a big factor in that. There's just, in general, there's more income on the east side. The land is more valuable. There's more taxes, and that invariably just going to drive more power decision making, whether intentional or not. And I'm not trying to call out anyone for intentionally trying to lead it that way. It may be happening, and I know it does happen, and I've seen it happen in a few cases. But I think in general, it's just a natural reaction to how that's structured. I think there's things that we can do to improve the west side's economy. I think there's ways to improve the west side's infrastructure and ways to improve the market forces that are in place there. And again, I think mostly by getting out of certain areas that we're involved in. But I think that west side is some of the last sort of empty real estate that's available in the valley. It's valuable, and the city itself should value that and should be paying attention. And this is city level stuff that perhaps at the state level is not going to be looked at much, but I'm involved at the city level as well, and I'd love to see us take advantage of that position we're in order to increase the influence on the west side as well. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but
nope, sounds good.
That's where my thoughts are coming from.
You got a comment?
Well, yeah. So here's a question. So I actually know some folks that live down. They're in the south, but still on the west side.
Sure.
When they moved in, these good friends of mine, they moved into an area that was agriculturally zoned. And I know zoning has to deal with cities, but the state stuck its fingers in zoning pretty hard, especially as the housing crisis continues. And they refuse to convert over to the residential zoning that the city's done. Are you going to be able to, when you go up there, is your intention to be able to like fight for that? Because some people have been living there for several generations and really prefer to keep the agricultural spirit, so to speak, the ability for them to raise their chickens or have a goat, which in a residential neighborhood you can't do under some city ordinances. What's your take on that?
So this is a fundamental question, right? As far as government power and authority and rights of citizens and of the state, and those are, can be, at least at times, tricky questions. In general, I prefer that the power remains with the citizens, especially with land ownership. If we're talking about property that is currently undeveloped, unowned, or owned by entities that are looking for rezoning in particular ways, there is a process they go through, and the citizens do have an ability to get involved in that process. We're fighting it right now in our community. There's exactly the same situation to a degree. There's some mixed agricultural, residential zoning areas around my home that are looking to be rezoned for more higher density or mixed commercial residential density projects. And it's something that we have to be, and we are very organized in getting the local citizens involved with at the city level and the zoning level. That's a good use of government, of the participation in the process of government by the people, to get involved at a very, very local level about something that directly impacts them. And I think that process is good, as long as when the state gets involved, obviously the hairs on the back of your head, stick up a little bit. You wonder why. And the whole idea, even the term housing crisis, it all seems to be generated language to try to influence, decision making. It's processes of the market that we describe in certain ways in order to get certain things done. I'm not a fan of it. I like to be a very facts driven and just kind of focus on, what are our powers and authorities, what are our rights that are supposed to be protected by that government. Is this an overreach? It sounds like it, but I don't know the exact location you're talking about or what's going on. But if they're just guising it under the idea of, there's a public housing crisis and we need to exert authority in order to change zoning in a particular, a municipality, that's obviously wrong. And that should not be something that we tolerate, especially in a quote unquote conservative state like Utah.
While we're on the topic of housing, it seems to me that the Federal Reserve has played a large role in creating housing prices that are above what a typical person could afford. And they did it through two-pronged approach. First, lowering interest rates below what a market would suggest they should be at. Those short-term interest rates influence the 30-year mortgage rate. And then they also printed tons of money, and that money showed up in the hands of investors, who in turn invested in. Would you be open to sponsoring a resolution or something that this isn't another hairball idea?
It's fair. It's fair. Let's hear it.
A resolution that says, I don't know, something to the effect, Chairman Powell, we appreciate the job the Federal Reserve does. We'd like to see you take responsibility for your mistakes and stop doing what you're doing.
I like the idea for sure.
It won't have any effect at the
and that's the problem. Like I'm not a. Go ahead.
Just 1 second. Who's Chairman Powell, for anyone who may not know?
The chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Okay.
So I'm not a fan of, in general, the idea of politics being used as advertising or as kind of. There's a lot of self-congratulation and pomp and hoorah in the field of politics.
Well, you sound like a successful businessman. Like, stop with the stuff that doesn't matter. Right?
Yeah, it's a lot of wasteful time, money, and effort, honestly. And there's a lot to do, at least from the docket that I've seen. And it feels like, especially like Quinn had told me that he was overwhelmed by the amount of work that was coming through his way. And he felt like he just simply couldn't even read all the bills, even in time. And that's a problem, because Quinn is someone that would read every bill. And if he can't read every bill, then most likely most people aren't reading every bill. And that is a scary concept to me, that we have elected officials voting on bills that they haven't read. And so this whole idea of sponsoring a resolution of some sort, I don't know how effective. Obviously, it seems to be more of a, I hate to say it, but it seems like a self-congratulatory measure, something to just kind of show people what you've done, and what you think. And I don't think that's very effective. Now, it might be politically very smart, and I'm not necessarily opposed to doing politically smart things, but I would rather be effective. Now, that being said, I don't remember if it was Thomas Sowell or Milton Friedman that talked about how inflation is purely a monetary phenomenon.
That was Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
Milton Friedman, yes, and that I don't like the Fed myself, and I don't like that manipulation, and it is a manipulation, and I think we've seen time and time again that interference creates more problems. It might create some short-term gains, both politically, socially, economically, for businesses as well as individuals. But in the end, it doesn't. It's always a problem that you're creating down the road, and when that problem comes back, that's the government's perfect opportunity to step in and say, "Oh, there's a problem." They don't mention they created it, but they'll tell you they have a solution on how to fix it, without saying that it's going to create another problem that down the road we're going to have to fix as well. And I just don't like this idea of that process. So long-winded answer, but yeah, I like the idea. I like the concept. I'd love to see that done away with. But I don't think, at least at state level politics, that's going to do much as far as for our state when it comes to tackling that. If it did, if there was some indication that would be effective, absolutely, I would be on board.
That was a good response from my perspective.
Thank
All right,
you.
I think we've used up your time. If you have one more minute, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the mask mandates.
Okay, so this is one that's very near and dear to my heart for those of you that do know. But I will say this, and it's something I've said before. I'll say it again. I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage as a politician to allow people to govern themselves, and to realize what the founding documents of our country, the ideas and concepts on how it was built, that it's for the people, by the people, that the people retain these powers and authorities, and that the state compelling any action, like there are instances where we have laws, we prevent people from doing certain things. It's very different than mandating people do certain things. And I think that it takes courage, like I said, to realize that while you may believe you know better, and you might even know better in some cases, and you can use a public health crisis, and again, crisis, I use that word in air quotes, but you can use any situation in that case to push any mandates that you believe would better society, or that would better our country or individuals' lives, or would protect them. But that's contrary to the ideas and principles of our nation. And I think that any politician on the right or the left, and I will call them all out, and I have, that would agree with any type of mandates, whether they're masks, vaccines, or any other type of taking away those decisions from those individuals and those families when it comes to making their own risk assessments. I think that's displaying cowardice, that they don't believe truly in their heart in the principles of a nation that's run by the people, and that we as legislature, or as all elected officials, serve by the will of the people and that we don't have any sort of authorities that are derived outside of what is given to us. And for that reason alone, I would 100% shut down as best I could any mask mandates, and I would pursue in any legal avenue that I could against any municipality or state legislature that would try to put them in place.
Well, thanks, Matt. For everyone, that was Matt MacPherson, and remember that the special election is held, and correct me if I'm wrong, I want to make sure I'm right on this, Wednesday, October 4th at 5:30. 5:30 is when delegate registration will begin, and it's being held at the Neil Armstrong Academy at 5194 Highbury Park, West Valley City.
Highbury Parkway. Yes.
Highbury Parkway. Okay. Yes. PKWAY.
Yes.
All right. Delegate registration is from 5:30 to 6:30, and the special election will start at 6:30 p.m.
And there are a couple of town hall events that they should be aware of. There's a virtual town hall event on Monday.
Yeah, I do. I actually, I did write that down. So Monday, September 24th is a virtual town hall. What time was that?
I believe that starts at 7.
And then Thursday, September 28th will be an in-person town hall at the West Valley Library.
That's right.
And I think that's everything covering that I've got for that news. I'll go over it again for anyone who didn't get it the first time.
Great.
Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And for other news, by the way, we have on Monday, October 9th, it's Columbus Day. Fun stuff to know. Tuesday, October 7th at 7 p.m., the County Executive Committee is meeting at the Holiday Library. On Wednesday, October 11th at noon is the E-Club Luncheon. The 6:30 at 6:30 on the same day, the Bylaws Committee will meet at the IHOP in Murray on State Street. And Saturday, October 28th, the State Central Committee will be meeting. The minutes and previous stuff on the SCC meetings are all available online, associated roll calls, etc. We're also talking about the resolutions they publish that you can find online, and you can talk about the bylaws all through the state party website. We also happen to have here Mr. Erb.
How you doing?
All right, guys, and you thought that we were almost done. No, Mr. Erb is also running against Matt MacPherson for House District 26, right?
That is correct.
I always ask that question. And just for anyone who knows, we had a break because we didn't have these guys scheduled back to back. So we're trying to make this as seamless as necessary. And we'll be asking Mr. Erb some questions as well. Right, Doc?
Yes. I want to hear your background.
Okay,
what do you do professionally?
Family?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. So my professional background, it has meandered a lot, but currently I'm a project manager. I work for a company called Neighborly. That company has about 30 franchise brands that are part of it, like Mr. Rooter, Mr. Electric, Molly Maid, a bunch of home service brands, basically. I work for the brand called Row Property Management, and my job is working with the 400 or so franchises across the United States to help them dial in their systems and automate them as much as possible to help them become more scalable and grow their businesses. So that's my job, helping them fix problems and move things out.
Is it a competitive world? Neighborly is pretty established, right?
Neighborly is a very large company in 5 different countries. Yeah. They're one of the larger franchise brands. They're owned by a private equity firm called KKR.
Okay.
Before you get any further, you should ask him the same question you asked Matt about a certain animal.
All right. If you were given an elephant,
Oh boy.
you cannot sell it, can't give it away, what do?
Can't sell it and I can't give it away?
If it makes you feel any better, the first time he asked Matt what he would do if he was an elephant, didn't tell it right.
Oh, okay. I don't have the capacity to take care of it, so I think the healthiest thing to do would be just set it free, since I can't give it away.
So there'd be an elephant running around the neighborhood? Boy, my kids would love that.
I don't think I'd let it free in my neighborhood. I'd take him out to the wilderness and hope he survives, because there's no way I have that skill. How's that?
That would be an awesome news story.
Yes, it would.
Representative Erb,
I mean, the climate of southern Utah isn't too far off of Africa, right?
I mean, it's a little bit more rocky.
Yeah,
some
fair.
might say.
Yep.
But
instant credibility as a legislator.
Right.
I've made the news.
All right. We ask you a couple questions.
Please do.
So, we're likely heading into a recession next year.
Mm-hmm.
Will you support any tax increases to help the health of the state budget, or would you prefer slowing growth and spending? What are your thoughts on the economy and the budget?
So I think that increasing taxes in a time of a recession is a trap. It's the perfect way to hurt those that are struggling the most. It's a really bad idea.
What would you, I mean, certainly there's a lot of room in the budget to reduce.
Mm-hmm.
Would you,
Right.
It's not easy. Going back to my time in the legislature, 2008, it was painful for legislative budgets. At least I assume.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but are you the type of guy that would do things tactfully, right?
Yeah, I think I know how to do things tactfully. I'm not just going to say no. I think that rather than saying no, or when you complain that there's a problem, it's not very helpful unless you have some sort of suggestions on how to fix the issue. And so I think that, well, quite frankly, I'd need to talk to people that know more than I do to figure out where we might be able to trim some fat if we needed to. So, and I think that it's really easy just because of the way that government budgets are done. It's very easy for them to just spend without paying any attention to it. I think I'll just say California is a great example of how that might work if it's not really reined in.
I'm curious. So the federal budget, boy, I was reading an ISI International Strategy and Investment article. They made the comment the federal budget is a grotesque 1.5 trillion above trend.
That's the word they used. Grotesque.
That is the word they used. I don't know what the federal budget's different than the state budget.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but they're not that different.
Correct. Yeah, I would agree.
Would you agree that federal?
I would love there to be a constitutional amendment at the federal level that required them to have a balanced budget like we need to have. I would absolutely love that. Oh, I can't even imagine the damage it would do short term though, but I think long term we'd be better off as a country.
You could phase it in, right? Say, hey, this year we're gonna close the gap by 1%, and next year 5%. Eventually, over time, you'd get there.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
You'd have to be careful about it for sure. I think just doing it all at once would be problematic to say the least.
What about mask mandates? They are in the news, coming back in some places.
So, I always like to look at unintended consequences. When it comes to a mask mandate, first of all, they decided to implement that based on a 2006 paper that was written without any study that was actually done. It was just, here's an idea of what we could do to reduce the spread. We can lock everybody down, and then we can do all these other things. There was no evidence that it would actually help. And people jumped on that because they wanted to see, I think that they felt like they wanted lawmakers acting. They wanted to show that they were willing to act. And honestly, that's the last thing that I want a lawmaker doing. I think there are better people to be acting in situations like that. And I think mask mandates in general are a very bad idea. For one, I don't think they do anything. People are terrible at wearing masks. Cloth masks were a joke from the start. They really, I mean, any logical person can see that, especially when you're sitting in a restaurant and people are, pulling them down to take every bite, that sort of thing. So it was okay to eat in a restaurant, but it wasn't okay to walk through Lowe's without a mask, where you have 10 feet of space around you. So they're nonsensical in their implementation, for one. But the worst part of it as we've probably heard in some stories, is deputizing people that have no right to be deputized and enforce rules. That's a huge problem. And so there's no real way to implement a mask mandate that makes sense. I think they should be avoided at all costs. And if health experts want to recommend wearing a mask, great. I mean, we knew from the beginning that COVID was more dangerous for those that were elderly or obese. That's where we should have been focusing our attention.
I sometimes think, going back to that time of mask mandates, boy, if nothing against doctors, but if doctors ran the world, this is what we'd get. Thank goodness we don't have doctors running the world.
Well, there's occasionally one that thinks they are.
So the other thing is I was reading, there was an article that was put out by the Salt Lake Tribune not too far back. Do you remember reading it about mask mandates, COVID? They actually called for, if I remember correctly, they called for harsh enforcement, including like the National Guard enforcing it. It was an opinion piece that was published out by the Salt Lake Tribune. It was kind of ridiculous. I made a post on my Facebook page about it. I'm not plugging that, but it was out there. And just on the hypothetical, if there was a call by members of the opposition, Democrats we'll call them, to put police on street corners and start handing out tickets to anyone not wearing a mask, what would your reaction to that be?
Outrage. I mean, I'd be calling on anybody and everybody that has the power to stop it to do so. It would be the best way to guarantee that this country would fall to pieces. People would not react well to that sort of thing. Because if you get people giving tickets, once again, you end up deputizing random people. And, I mean, isn't that pretty much what Hitler did?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but
I'm just saying that's what he did. He just deputized random people to enforce things.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's an equivalent, but it's something I think we should definitely avoid.
The underlying principle is basically the underlying girder of that question is does force work?
Not in a situation like that.
So,
what about, I'm curious, so, right, the coming month, you're a legislator.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of things on the docket.
True.
What type of things would be your priorities? What would you do first? Would you open a bill file first? What would be your first bill file?
Well, I mean, I would absolutely start looking at all the resources I could find to get summaries of each of the bills to see which ones would be the most concerning and which ones I need to dig into more to understand better. Some of them seem pretty benign, but others, are definitely not benign. And so I think that I'd focus where I can see I can make the biggest impact.
What about, so I was looking at the top priorities of voters in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And things like spending growth, small government are important priorities. Education is always up there. I don't know what do you think about education? At the state level, we've put a lot of money into it in the past decade.
We have. Mm-hmm.
And not much has changed in terms of student achievement on scores.
Mm-hmm.
There's been no movement, pretty much. I don't know. It's not an easy question, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you love our teachers.
I do.
And I don't know what.
I have some pretty. Go ahead.
One of the main arguments that's being thrown out by Democrats specifically, and this being a Republican podcast, position or Democrats, the main argument that's being thrown at Republicans concerning education funding also has to do with vouchers. If in addressing his question, you could just address your opinion about vouchers as well. We'd
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
Yeah, I have kind of I don't know. It's definitely not a mainstream view of education. I actually think that in general, the gamification of education would be a lot more fun for kids. And rather than focusing on testing against a standardized test, if they were able to, I don't know if you've ever used Khan Academy for learning.
Yeah.
I love the fact that it will quiz you and then it will step back according to your misses and re-educate you on those points and then retest you again. And if you really miss it, it'll step way back, right? So that kind of education has to be a very personalized education. I think it's awesome. And I think if we were to lean into an education that is like that, where teachers can step in and redirect a student if they get distracted or help guide them on something, or, you know, that could be their role, but that leveraging technology could be extremely powerful. But it might not work for every single student, right? And so I think that I understand the plight of teachers and the Board of Education, and that their fear is that vouchers would take money away from the school system. I totally understand that. However, if you're truly doing a good job, the vouchers will come your way. Make sure that people are aware of the programs that you're offering and the value that they offer. And if you believe in free markets at all, then the vouchers will come your way. You'll be rewarded for the hard work that you do, and you'll get the students applying, and you'll have to turn some away ultimately because you won't have the resources to take them all, right? So I think vouchers are a great idea. I think that there should be accountability when it comes to it. Obviously, giving a voucher to, let's say, a family to literally just homeschool their kid and keep all the money might be a poor use of state funds. Right? So I think that there would need to be a lot of very careful thought put into how a voucher system would be implemented. But yeah, I think they're a great idea. And I think that it would force schools to rethink how they approach learning and how they approach testing at a group level. It would be extremely disruptive, and I'm okay with that. That might make some people upset, but that's my opinion.
Reminds me of Joseph Schumpeter, who coined the term creative destruction, right?
Yes, very much so.
What grade would you start the gamification at? Boy, I occasionally I'm an adjunct professor and I'll teach at the university or at different universities. I always have Kahoot or, different interactive things, but what you're talking about is much more than that.
Yeah, for sure. What age would I start it at? As young as possible. I wouldn't, require kids to go to school younger, but I think encouraging them to start certain educational games to kind of give them a foundation even before they're 5 and 6 years old might be a great idea. Things to focus on language and very, very basic reading skills. But that's something that you can give parents before they're even bringing their kids to school. Instead of putting them in front of the TV, you can hand them an iPad that's locked to very specific applications and let them have at it. And they still should have some trade-off, right? You need some outside time. I think that I had a friend in high school that they were homeschooled, but they grew up in a really wealthy family. Their education was amazing. When they wanted to learn about government, they would first learn about government, and then they would go volunteer at the state capitol, or they'd fly to Washington, D.C., and they'd volunteer there and get involved. And then they would come back home, and then they would learn about the things that they experienced there. And so it would solidify that education. Most of us can't afford that kind of education. But something that could simulate it would be really interesting.
Boy, so I'm trying to think about how to classify it, but there's this personalized healthcare, right? The movement towards personalized healthcare.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like what you're saying is maybe more personalized education,
Mhm.
and it's really good for kids.
Yeah, let kids focus on what they enjoy. Make sure that they have a basic understanding of everything, I think is a good idea, and continue to push them, because sometimes their interests are not really awakened. In fact, they're never really awakened in certain aspects until much later when they mature a little bit more, right? So I think it's good to give them things they hate to a point, but also allow them to really run with things that they love.
Why did you? I think we've used up your time. One question.
Yeah, go
One more
ahead.
question.
Okay.
The West Side.
Hmm.
You would represent the West Side.
Right.
I don't know. Sometimes the West Side competes with the East Side for resources and for. Boy, it just seems like sometimes the two sides compete with each other. How would you ensure that the West Side wins?
The exact phrase you used last time was sometimes the east side is prioritized and the west side is just like, well, not the exact phrase, but the idea is the west side just gets left out.
Sure. I will say that my experience living in West Valley is that the neighborhood roads are actually pretty good. They're pretty decent roads. And yet you go on to, the bigger roads that actually have stoplights, and suddenly they're filled with these potholes all over the place, and you just get beat up. I mean, I don't remember seeing massive potholes on I-80, and yet you go west on 201, and I'm always afraid I'm going to pop a tire if I don't dodge properly, all the potholes all over the place. Now, if you look at where that money comes from, my understanding is that the funding, and if any of this is wrong, please correct me, that neighborhoods are funded largely by city funds. And then you get out onto other roads. Some are funded at a state level, and then some, of course, you've got interstate roads that are funded at a federal level. So how that money gets prioritized, it sounds like, is being done just fine at the city level. But at the state level, it really feels like that's where we're failing. Because you look at federal highways, I don't see any potholes on that. 201 is a state road, right? And yet it's terrible. I-80, that one's a federal road. It seems to be in much better shape. So, I realize that when it comes down to it, the federal funding, we still as a state prioritize where that money goes. But it certainly seems like the roads such as 3500 South or 4800 West, just two roads that I'm very familiar with, they did recently redo 3500 South. I think that's awesome, as long as they don't suddenly, as soon as they finish it, start digging trenches to lay down new lines or something, which seems to be the pattern. I have no idea why it happens that way, but it really makes me sad when they just finished a road and then they dig it up to put something else in that they forgot. Seems like there could be better planning there.
That's the Utah way.
I don't think it's just the Utah way.
Well, for the listener, we did this only about 20 minutes ago, but we're going to do it again, just to make sure that everything's right, so we can confer with you.
Okay.
So the special election is occurring on October 4th at 5:30. Is that right?
That's right.
It's being held at Neil Armstrong Academy at 5194 Highbury Parkway in West Valley City. The delegate registration is occurring at 5:30 to 6:30, and the special election meeting is occurring at 6:30 p.m. You're also doing 2 town halls. Is that correct?
Yes, one on Monday.
September 25th, House District 26 virtual town hall at 7 p.m.
Right,
and
the
then
virtual. Mm-hmm.
An in-person one on the 28th. That's Thursday, September 28th, at West Valley Library. That's 2880 West, 3650 South, West Valley City.
Right.
And
don't confuse that with the Hunter Library. For some reason, people think Hunter Library. That seems to be what people know better. But the West Valley Library is the one closest to West Valley City Hall. Just to clarify.
You will be there. Matt has said that he'll be there, and the other gentleman who declined said
Dennis will be there.
He'll be there. So we did reach out for everyone who would like to know. We did reach out to Dennis and offer him some time, and he declined. But we do still very much appreciate both Matt and Mr. Erb. I can't remember your first name.
Kyle
Erb. Everyone now sees my brain fart, as it were. Mr. Erb Thanks for coming out. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And if you win, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll have you back on.
Excellent. I love it.
Any last comments?
No, I mean, maybe just one. I will sometimes, get the question about prioritization of, what am I really going to focus on? Each bill that I look at, the measuring stick that I want to use is whether or not it will reduce or increase individual liberty. And so that'll be it. I really want to focus on every bill and figure out which it's going to do. If it's going to decrease individual liberty and the majority want to pass it, I'll vote against it because I don't want to reduce individual liberty. So that's where I stand.
Boy, I love it. I'd be curious, with every bill, there's a fiscal note and there's the state impact, the local impact, and then there's a regulatory impact. You could add another box on there to say, does this bill, right?
Yeah.
And then staff would do an individual liberty impact on that. Boy.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Absolutely.
This has been the Salt Lake County Republican Party broadcast with your host, Dr. Thomas Young, and co-host Nathan Ricks. We had 2 members that are seeking election for House District 26 on, and we're glad that you can join us. And we wish both of them the best of luck, as well as the gentleman who wasn't able to be on here today. And thanks for joining us again. Welcome to the Salt Lake County Republican Party broadcast.